Hello and welcome to Farnborough here in the UK, where we're having a look at the brand new BMW i5, and I've had a tour of this car on the channel in Dublin, but I haven't managed to drive it until today. So what do we know so far? Well, there's still going to be a 520i. There is no diesel 5 Series coming down the line for Ireland. There's then a 530e, and then there's the i5. Price points are €70,000, €76,000 and €90,000, and that's not including the performance M60, which has a fairly impressive 800 Newton meters of torque and 600 brake horsepower, and that'll do 0 to 100 kilometers in just over 3 seconds. Not an M5, but an M5 in many ways, just electric. So let's have a little look around the car today here on Nobby on Cars. Well, it's still a kidney grille, but it looks different to what you might have come to expect from BMW. There's no bits of chrome, and it's closed because it doesn't need the same cooling properties of an ICE engine. Still a couple of air curtains over the front of the vehicle. This designation is just spotted by the I. So you have M Sport and then you have M Pro, which gets you a few nicer upgrades. If you go for the €76,000 530e, you kind of get a bit more as standard. Wouldn't be an M car without some red brake calipers, so yes, you get them on the side. The Hofmeister kink is still over the side of the vehicle. And I mean, it's a tough job since 1972 and now into the 8th generation of the 5 Series. The designers kind of don't want to mess it up. You still want it to look like a 5 Series, but you want it to look like times are changing. One thing that has changed on the car is we now have a 5, same as the 7, and one day there'll be a 3 for the i3, no doubt about that. Now, there's different packs you can get on the car. For example, there's a tech pack which allows you to maneuver the car using the BMW app. There's lots of features actually in this car that if you're a Tesla fan, you'll say, well, Tesla's had that for years, so they've kind of been the blueprint for lots of companies as to the features they want to add to the car. This also has gaming on board now as well, but you use your phone as the controller. So if you were to go for carbon, you'll get things like a carbon fiber boot spoiler, still typically BMW, very, very small, very discreet. And on the back here you have eDrive 40, and over the left hand side, i5. 5 Series boot is pretty much as good as ever. Even the aperture is pretty decent. Sometimes this design of car just suffers from a fairly small opening, and it makes getting things in and out a bit trickier. That is not the case in this car, so good job there. In terms of storage down below, then you've got a bit of space for cables as well. That's good to see. Into the back of the vehicle, so we have 4-way climate zones, and you'll see there's kind of a different style of controls now for climate, so it's all digitized, looks good. 2 USB-C charging ports also down there, your own air vents, and BMW say it's kind of a bit more thought has gone into where rear passengers go in the i5, so essentially they're saying it's better than ever, but they would say that, wouldn't they? I've been in kind of different colour materials. Black still looks pretty good, but I think that extra luxury feel is captured by the oyster colour leather that we've seen in BMW for many, many years, but it still looks great. I do feel like it has improved. Certainly there's cutouts on the back of these seats for knees, there's space under the seats, so all over. Legroom and stuff is certainly good. They don't look as snazzy as things like on the iX, but these areas for hanging things are still there, and a charging port on the back of your seat. So there's at least 6 charging ports on this car, very handy. This version of the i5 is rear wheel drive. Obviously the X-Drive is available the higher up the food chain you go. 340 brake horsepower through the rear wheels. Might seem like a lot, but it's not really stuff that BMW haven't dealt with before, so you're okay. Straight away you can probably hear that there's sensors telling you if you're going over the speed limit. Again, it's stuff that we're kind of getting used to having in cars at this stage. Most of them can be turned off, and most of them have to be reset every single journey. Once again, Hans Zimmer has inspired that acceleration soundtrack, you can turn it off, however, if you're not a fan of Mr. Zimmer. So depending on what packs you want to get, there's essentially 5 that you can add to the car. Some will give you camera forward visibility that you can see out of the car when you're driving. Technically, you could probably just look at that screen and do its magic. So you can precondition the car as you'd expect. Now the i5 has gaming on board. Again, much like stuff we've seen in Tesla, where you can, in this case, use the phone as your controller. I like that they've included, when you get to your destination, how much state of charge battery you'll have, and if you were to return to your point where you've left off, it'll tell you how much range you'll have when you get back there. The real question is, have BMW managed to hold on to the dynamics of what we've come to expect from a BMW when it comes to being behind the wheel? More weight from batteries, different driving dynamics from a BEV. They're all things that affect how this car is going to feel. And if you've been a BMW fan all your life, is it possible to get into this and still feel happy? I mean, if you get beyond the loss of that internal combustion engine in your head, then yes, it's still an enjoyable car to drive. It handles well. If you want to pony up for the adjustable dampers, yeah, I've driven it in the M60. It's about €4,000 from the best of my knowledge. It is very, very comfortable. You can feel the difference in the car, but the standard car is still pretty okay. It's certainly a long way from the run-flat BMWs of the noughties that were just way too hard. I will say that I'm being very careful with the sat-nav. A couple of us over here today from Ireland have both been caught out by just the lack of, I suppose, zooming in to junctions. It's easy to miss a turn. It's easy to mistake an exit on the roundabout. That's something that they could do better. Now the car has over-the-air updates, so you'd imagine things like that are possible. If there's enough people giving out about things like sat-nav, they might be able to change that. They reckon in the UK 400,000 vehicles can benefit from over-the-air updates, whether that's software or an updated sat-nav that's built into the car. And it's no slouch. It's 6 seconds to 100 kilometers. You know, to get that on tap, yes, you're paying the extra for it. The 520i is only 208 brake horsepower. So there's actually a massive, massive drop there. And again, for drivers who would have had 520d models over the years, the brake horsepower may not have been much higher, but there was just that lovely bit of diesel torque. Not to mention the fact that if you drove it carefully, you'd probably get somewhere between 900 and 1,000 kilometers out of a tank. It's not going to be the case in this. The range officially combined is 565 kilometers. I really think from even driving the i4, you're talking 350 to 400, particularly if you kind of enjoy the performance of the car. It'll do a little over 200 kilowatt charging on DC. They actually mentioned the gaming earlier on. In 10 minutes of gaming, the fastest charger you can find for the capacity of the car, you could get about 160 kilometers in 10 minutes. That's supposedly the idea of it. If you want to pay extra for a 22 kilowatt onboard charger, it's a little over €1,000, which if you're going to be driving a lot, I think you'd see the value of that back pretty quickly, because you're not then relying on the faster chargers, and generally in Ireland you're waiting for one of them. The on-street, not so much. I know a lot of you watching these videos in the UK always say, can you put up the consumption for us? And now I'm going to have to do it the opposite way around. So it's 3.2 miles per kilowatt hour. It's an 81 usable kilowatt hour battery, so you just multiply 3 by 81 and you'll get an idea of what your range probably is going to be. There it is on the screen for those of us watching at home, and in the rest of Europe, you know, UK, you could just convert. We'd all be friends again, you know, it'd be so much easier. That BMW feedback through the steering that they're famous for, it's still there, but it is quite light. You know, there's so many things going on in the background of modern cars now, whether it's a 48 volt motor to help with stabilization of the car through corners and all these kind of things. They add weight to the car, and they certainly sometimes can just take away that simple, fun, figure it out for yourself kind of driver enjoyment. It's pretty quiet. I had the iX1 recently and I felt that the tyre noise from that was very, very loud. This is very, very quiet. I'm not really hearing any sort of major wind disturbance. That's despite these fairly large carbon fibre style wing mirrors over the side of the car. I'm looking around then in the interior, so the light bar from the i7 is now in here. That will change colour obviously for your ambient lighting. If you press your hazard lights on, it flashes red throughout the whole vehicle. I'm not going to test it now because the person behind me think I'm doing something up. There's a wireless charging pad down here, but only one side charges. Missing a bit of a trick there, because even the new Skoda Kodiaq is coming with dual plates for charging, and again something Tesla have had for a long time. And you know, if you don't want to pay the i7 prices, you can add on things like window blinds and make this feel like an i7. Certainly sometimes you look at them side on and you go, is that an i7 or an i5? Space wise on the inside it's not the same, it's not comparable, particularly in the back. But I think it's fair to say that a lot, I mean the steering wheel is straight out of it. This wraparound screen now is featuring in lots of BMW models, and in that sense, things that usually you got in the more higher spec cars are now creeping and trickling down the range. That's potentially a good thing, but also if you've spent your 6 figures on your BMW and someone in a much cheaper one has the same interior essentially as you might be a bit peeved off about that. Having driven the M60 earlier on today, yes, it's great power. Yeah, it looks a bit better with the alloys and stuff like that. And yeah, it's nice knowing that you have the beefier performance, but really 340 brake horsepower is enough for anybody. It's got over 400 Newton meters of torque. So you're never wanting for power, overtaking power, any of that stuff. It's kind of all on tap. And I suppose that's the benefit of an i5 versus a 520i. If you're going to pay a little bit extra, even the 530e is 300 brake horsepower. If you charge it, that'll do a range of up to 100 kilometers, so they say, and you could charge that car for probably less than a tenner and, you know, get in and out of work or whatever on a daily basis. So there's lots of options here. You're not forced into electrification if you don't want to in the 5 Series. I think that is a good thing. But I think if you could still get a 520d, that's the one a lot of people would be actually hankering after, and it's perhaps a bit of a shame that we won't see the 520d in this new version of the 5 Series, the 8th generation. Overall, I feel this is a car that still feels BMW. They have retained pretty much the driving dynamics. I mean, there's going to be a difference between petrol, diesel and electric and how the car performs. I think one thing that's kind of interesting is the plug-in hybrid is kind of the sweet spot. I mean, yes, you can go for the full fat version of the car, but as soon as you start adding packs, this is suddenly a 100,000 euro car. And there's lots of 7-seat and there's lots of 7 Series vibes or i7 vibes in the car, don't get me wrong. But a car that was once 50-something thousand euro and sort of 60 grand for a really well-spec'd 520d is now an awful lot more expensive. Even the 520i is quite a bit elevated in its price point. So if it were me and I didn't need the electric range or didn't want to go fully electric, I think the 530e, as long as you're willing to charge it, because then you're carrying all that extra weight around, it's just as good, the 5 Series that we've come to know. It's been around all our lives. But like a lot of EVs now, it is creeping into a price point that is just really, really expensive. The M60 is blistering to drive. It's really, really quick. But again, the 340 brake horsepower that this car comes with, that's enough for most people. So I don't know why you'd want to go M60, just go full fat plug-in hybrid M5 when that happens. So a good job of still making it feel like a 5 Series. I like that there's different options. Maybe actually they're spoiling us too much because you can just get petrol, plug-in hybrid and full EV. Maybe that's where they want to go to. But hands up if you ever drove a 520d, and that's the car that I think would still sell really, really well if you could get it. Anyway, let me know what you think of the car. Have you got one on order? Is it still BMW enough for you? And would you go electric now that the i5 is available? Thanks very much for watching. I'll see you in the next one.